Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? That's what I'm talking about. I'm chilling this morning. Yeah, welcome to the seminars. We have the privilege of having Lynette do the Bible trek this morning. Super excited for that. I got kind of confused, got ahead of myself yesterday. If you saw, I thought it was Lars. Lars is next week. Who noticed in the homework that the hand signs you had to learn in the homework? Like last week, we got a little bit too far. Did anyone notice that? Yeah, but I'm saying the hand signs that were assigned to them, they haven't turned in as many. So all that to say, we got a little confused. So today, actually, Lynette is not introducing as many, but she is reviewing quite a few, which I think will be really helpful for people to just review, to really get the timeline and the hand signs down. That's the main gist of what we're doing today. I'm trying to think if there's any other announcements. For the other class, the Dare King class, just remember to be reading that book. God Has a Name book, so it doesn't sneak up on you. For the book review at the end here in a couple month-ish or so. Other than that, I think that's it. Anyone have any questions before we jump in? All right, if not, I will pray for Lynette. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for Lynette and just the wonderful woman of God that she is. Just use her, Lord. I pray that we would be hungry disciples, just hungering and thirsting for more of you, to know your word, to learn these things in the Old Testament, where it says all of Scripture is God-breathed and it's useful for teaching us, correcting us, and training us, and for equipping us for every good work. And so I pray that we would know all the things we learn here are very applicable to our lives, to train us and grow us, and just to know you more. So give us a hunger to know you more and to press in. Thank you for the people that are here who want to learn and grow, and just pray for a blessing on this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
If can I just start this slide with you? I mean, I don't care one way or the other. It can be this way as long as it's that way there. That'll work. That'll work. Okay, first thing, everybody up. Let's do the hand signs. Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't like it because I feel like you can't see me because I'm so thin. I'm blocked by this pole. Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Okay. First of all, what do we start? Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament, 39 books. History, poetry, prophecy. New Testament, 27 books. History, epistles, prophecy. Creation, fall, flood, confusion. 2000 BC, ancient Near East, Persian Gulf, Salt, Abraham, Lot, Terah, Tigris, Euphrates, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, Mediterranean, Israel, Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, Jacob, Israel, Joseph, Egypt, Israel, Egypt, 400 years bondage. 1500 BC, Moses meets Yahweh, let my people go. No. Plagues, Passover, Red Sea, Mount Sinai, law, long name, tabernacle, Levites and priests, offerings and feasts, numbering the faces, Kadesh oasis, 12 spies, wonders, dies. Moab, Moses, second law, dies. And then we have Joshua, Jordan, Jericho, divide, conquer, south, north, divide, settle, 12 tribes, judges, Deborah, Samson. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes except for Ruth and Samuel. Okay, that's how far we got last week with Ty. And so I just want to do a couple of things today. You can sit down if you want to. When you are standing up here, getting those all, I did that so many times this morning and through this week. And when you're standing up here, it's like, so as Jason said, yeah, there was just a little bit of a disconnect and probably my fault in what we were doing or the way that the Handsigns and the books kind of coincided. So it gave me a chance to do something that kind of I wanted to be able to do today, is to just do a review and to be able to connect the Handsigns, why we do the Handsigns, to the story. Because as I've talked with people, sometimes I think there's been a disconnect of that. You know, we do the Handsigns. And so I just want to start with a plug with why that's important. So there's kind of two things that I think about. Who grew up going to Sunday school? Not lots of people, actually, not lots of people. In Sunday school, when you're a little kid, you hear lots of stories throughout the Old Testament. And all of these stories seem somewhat random and arbitrary. They're good stories, and you think, oh, yeah, that's very cool. But to really understand how they fit into the big story and how they point to Christ, it was never clear to me anyway. And I think that that's people who grew up in Sunday school, that's oftentimes the case, is that there's just all this, things that you learn that are picked out of the mega context. And so this kind of puts it into a timeline. And why do we care about the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament points to Jesus. The Old Testament, this mega structure that we are putting together, is the thing that outlines all the way up to the point that we get to Jesus. And it helps us to see God's character. But almost everything in the Old Testament points to Jesus in some way, points to our need for Jesus. So many things that God has done. And when you're walking closely with the Lord, you see this in your own life, how the things that you do, like God will bring them about and kind of like tie them up in a bow. And it's like, oh yeah, that's very awesome how you work those things together for me to teach me this lesson that I couldn't have learned any other way. And that's what God is doing all the way through the Old Testament, is that he is teaching them who he is. So the second thing is the Handsigns. Sometimes we think, well, that seems like a kindergarten thing to do, is to do these Handsigns but really, there are three ways that people take in information. You take in it auditorily, visually, and kinesthetically. Those are the three kind of types of learning that people do. And as we get older, people think, oh, I'm not really a kinesthetic learner anymore. But I don't think that's true. I don't think that that's true at all. Like, I'm going to use Marlena as an example. Marlena is a teacher at the job that she does, and she teaches people at Farm Bureau how to do a whole bunch of different services that they provide at their call center. And do you think that Marlena just teaches and teaches and teaches and then goes, okay, good luck? She doesn't do that at all. She doesn't do that at all. She lets them practice. She lets them put that into practice. Because, if you've ever had somebody show you how to do a computer thing, they're like, oh, just do this and this and this and this. And then they walk away and you're like, what? You have to do it. You have to do the thing. And so we've grown up and we've thought that part doesn't help, but it really does help to trigger our memory. The more things that you can tie to a story to help you remember it, the easier it is that you're going to remember the overall timeline. And so the Handsigns are important because you will remember that probably. You'll be thinking, okay, where am I in the story? Where am I in the timeline? You'll be doing the Handsigns if you know the Handsigns and if you understand how they tie back to the story, the overall story. So that is kind of what I wanted to be able to do a quick review, tie up a few loose ends from last week so that next week we're back on track of where things should be. Okay, so this part is just about the overall structure of the Bible. We have an Old Testament and a New Testament. Testament basically means covenant. So we have an old covenant, and the Old Testament is about the old covenant that God made with Moses, and the 10 Commandments and all the big law. And then we have the new covenant that Christ ushered in, that according to Hebrews put an end to that covenant. It's obsolete and disappearing, that we have a new and better covenant. And so that's why we talk about that. But the hand signs by themselves, the 50 that are on this board up here, are the things that really walk us through. And so I just kind of wanted to share a little bit more about why we do the things we do. Okay, so the first hand sign is not going down. It's not, oh, do I have to just like that? Okay. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so the first hand sign is creation. And why do we do creation? Because God created the world. God created the heavens and the earth. And so that ties us back to creation. So that one's pretty easy. And the next hand sign. And why do we do fall? Because men fell. Because very early on, we don't know how long after creation, and people were on the earth, Adam and Eve. We don't know how soon, but it didn't take a long time. In their lifetime, for sure, they fell. They sinned and ushered in sin for all of us. Prior to that, sin was not in the world. Eve and Adam fell, then that happened. So what's next? And so what's the flood about? Noah. Yeah. And so God, the world was corrupt, and everyone did evil. There was no good in anyone, that sin had become so rampant in everyone's life from the time that Eve and Adam fell. Sin had become so rampant that the thoughts in every person's mind was to do evil all the time. And so God said, I'm going to wipe it out. And so we say flood. So that represents the flood that happened at that time, that wiped out creation for the most part, but saved Noah and his 3 sons and his wife and their wives. Yeah. And so why is that story important? Redemption. Did somebody say that in the back? Yeah. In the New Testament, it talks about that story. It talks about how they were saved through the flood, which now represents baptism. And so that's an important story. It points back to Christ. And baptism is a picture of death and redemption. It all ties together when we just understand the story. Then what's the next one? So why do we say confusion? Why is there confusion? Why do we do this sign that goes with confusion? Just say it again. Yeah, he scattered. So at the Tower of Babel, they were building this tower because they thought they were going to go to heaven by building this huge tower. And so God confused the languages. And so everybody at the place was speaking a different language, and it caused the people to scatter and to go fill greater parts. So we do like this because it scattered the people. Then what's next? So then, so that's kind of like ancient history of the world. And then, like Tad says, we start to zero in on just one man, on just one person. And so we start the timeline about 2000 BC. So we point to our watch because the way that this works is so nice. It's about every 500 years, you have something major happens all the way up to Christ. And it helps us to put it into a timeline. So often, I kind of had an idea of the books in order, but the books aren't exactly like the timeline. And so you think, Tad did a quiz about putting it on a timeline, and I didn't get it right, because in my mind, it's like, well, this goes here, so that should be, and so having that timeline really helps to understand that. And then next, ancient Near East. So we're drawing a map. those of you who are not ambidextrous, the map is a two-handed thing, because when you're putting things on the map, things on this side go and things on this side. And so if you're putting the Sea of Galilee over here, not right. It's, I'm doing it backwards from you guys. So you have ancient Near East, and it's understanding the map, because this is the playing field where everything happened all the way through the Bible, all the way through, clear to the end. This is where everything happens. And so kind of just having an understanding of the geography in that area is important. And so the first place on the map that we're going to start is where? And do I have a pointer? I do kind of, but is over here. Let me just see if I do have the what? I should be able to do it. Where did it go? Do you see it? Anywhere? Oh, there it is. It flew by. Anyway, I'll just point because it's easier than trying to chase that thing around. So why do we care about Because that's where Abraham was from. So if we're going to start narrowing down to one guy, where did he start? He started it at and is right by the Persian Gulf. So this body of water over there is the Persian Gulf. And so he's right around the rim of the Persian Gulf. We stick our finger in the Persian Gulf and it tastes like salt. So salt outlines the major players in that part of the game. Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah. So that's why we say those things. Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah. God gave Abraham this promise that through you, all of the nations of the earth would be blessed through your family. So that's Christ. That's Christ, because Abraham was the father of the nation of Israel, but through him came Christ, in which all nations were blessed. So even from here, it wasn't just about Israel. He was saying all nations, all nations. God wanted all people, even from the beginning. Okay, I got to go back up, I think. Yeah. Let me just go back up. So we have some more things on the map to point out. So we have Persian Gulf. We said salt, Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah. And then we have some rivers to put in. We have the Tigris and the Euphrates. So these rivers over here, Tigris and Euphrates. And then we have Sea of Galilee, that little dot. So you point that on the map, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. And then Mediterranean. So now you kind of have the framework for the map, the bodies of water. And then Israel. Why is this Israel? Because Israel is this little strip of land right there. That's Israel. So you get the Israel. And then what is next? And why is this? Ishmael, Isaac. The what? That's it. It starts with the letter I. And I always think Ishmael was the son that was the blooper. He's the one who Abraham and Sarah tried to do things on their own. Abraham and Sarah tried to help God along. And so I always think you do Ishmael with your left hand, because he was he was not the son of promise. Isaac was the right guy. He's the one who was supposed to be the son of promise. And so, sorry, I'm kind of right and left challenge. I have a left hand indicator right there, a big scar. And so Ishmael is the son not of promise. Isaac is the right guy. So he's the son of promise. So Ishmael, Isaac, that's why we put them, they start with I for our eyes. And then Esau, why is Esau this? Because he's hairy, big hairy red guy. And then Jacob, because he's a mama's boy. But what happens next? Yeah, and how did he get his name changed? He wrestled with God and prevailed. And so, Jacob started out being Weasel Boy, who was conniving and swindled his way into getting 2 wives. Actually, he swindled his way into getting 1 wife, but ended up with 2 because the swindler got swindled. And he ended up with Leah first and then with Rachel, who he loved. And when he was on his way back to meet Esau, who he cheated out of his birthright, he was afraid. And so he met God and wrestled with him. And he said, I won't let go until you bless me. And he wrestled with God and prevailed. And so that's why he didn't have to be the swindler anymore. He could be Israel, who is the father of the nation of Israel, plus the heritage that comes from Jesus. So one of the things that I love about the Old Testament is that God used really broken people. He used really people who didn't do very much right. They did a lot right. Let me back out of that. They did a lot right, but they didn't do everything right. They didn't do everything perfect. Abraham had an Ishmael. That wasn't the right thing to do. He gave away his wife twice out of fear, and yet he's known in the Bible as the man of faith. The man of faith. Those were things that weren't very faith. They didn't seem like they were things of faith, but also he was ready to sacrifice Isaac on the altar. That's faith, man. That's great faith. So same with Jacob. And then what comes next? After we say Israel, we have Joseph. And why is this Joseph? Yeah, because of the Technicolor Dreamcoat. And so Joseph, why we say this is because Jacob loved is it Rachel? Rachel more than Leah. Rachel was not super fertile, so she only had 2 sons. She had Joseph and Benjamin. And so Joseph was his favorite. And so he had these 12 sons, and to his 1 son, who was not even the first in line, not the firstborn, who normally would be the favorite. It was, a later born son. Joseph was his favorite. And so he gave him this great coat. And it also made his brothers hate him and despise him. And so because his brothers despised him, they sent him to Egypt. And what happened in Egypt to Joseph? A lot of not good things. A lot of not good things. Everywhere he went, he prospered. Like Psalm 1 says, the man who, meditates on the word day and night, whatever he does prospers. That's what happened to Joseph. Everywhere he went prospered, but he didn't go good places. He started out as a slave in Potiphar's house. From there, he ended up in prison, and in prison he prospered. And then he ended up in Pharaoh's house, and he made Pharaoh prosper. And through Joseph, he saved the nation of Israel because there was a famine. And it also reconciled Joseph back with his brothers. So after Joseph goes to Egypt, then who? Israel goes to Egypt. So we have Israel back to that guy, and then back pointing on to Egypt. So you think about your map. Sorry, I'm just going to flip back there if I can. Egypt is over here. So they were traveling around from and traveling around in the promised land. Sorry, I lost my shoe. And they ended up in Egypt. So when we think about, going down to Egypt, they were up here and then they went down to Egypt, kind of off towards the left. So it references back the map. Okay. Sorry, I have a cough. And then what happened after Israel got to Egypt? Yes, 400 years of bondage. God had told Abraham that was going to happen, that his descendants would be in bondage. And so why were they in bondage in Egypt? because a new Pharaoh arose that didn't know anything about Joseph and the great things that Joseph did and how he prospered Egypt. He came to power and he just saw, man, here's this nation out here that looks like they're going to wreck us if we don't like really subjugate them and oppress them heavily. So that's what happened for 400 years. But what happened to Israel during that 400 years of bondage? They multiplied into a great nation. Even under the oppression of bondage, they still grew. So that takes us to the end of Genesis. So those are the hand signs that go with the book of Genesis. So a lot of the hand signs are with Genesis because it's a long book and it really is a lot about what happens in our history. But what happens after the 400 years of bondage? Yeah, we go back to our timeline because, I said about every 500 years. So then we're back to 1500 BC, Moses. And why do we do this for Moses? Because he was carrying his staff that he held up when he was parting the Red Sea, and that he put the serpent on. It was the staff, and so he's Moses, and you kind of say it that way, Moses, because he was, he was a friend of God. He sat with God. He went into a tent and hung out with God. Yeah, and so he's a heavy hitter in it. So what happens to Moses? He meets Yahweh. And where does he meet Yahweh? At the burning bush. Exactly right. He sees a bush that's on fire, and he's like, whoa, what is that about? Normally, if you see a bush on fire, you run the other way because you're like, fire. But he went towards it because he was like, that's weird, because here's a bush that is way on fire, but it's not being burnt, not being consumed. That's what made him approach God, and he met Yahweh. Now, so that's pretty awesome. And so he meets Yahweh, and then what? Let my people go. Woo, woo. Okay, so God, what Yahweh means is he is, and that's what you do the rest of your life, is figuring out who he is to you. And so there's some things. God is most high, everlasting, Father, healer, banner. So, but also God does that for you, is that you go through a trial and you learn something about his good character. You learn that he is provider. You learn that he is healer. And that's the name of the game. That's the goal, is to really understand the character of God, who he is. So Moses is charged with going to Pharaoh and trying to convince him to let the Israelites go. So he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, no. And so then, because he is hard-hearted and will not let the people of Israel go, what does God do next? He sends the plagues. So why do we do this for plagues? Because of what? Yeah, because of it kind of represents lice, boils, things that were coming upon them, all of these terrible plagues. And so that's represents the plagues. And then, yeah, Passover. So you're going to take your thumb and you pass over. And so why does this represent Passover? Because you put blood on the doorway. So when God sent the destroyer to kill all the firstborn of Egypt, he said, if I see blood on the doorpost, so that's this, then I will pass over you. And so the destroyer passed over those houses when he saw the blood. and of course that didn't happen. And for the Egyptians, they didn't put blood on their doorpost, so the destroyer didn't pass over. Instead, he killed all the firstborn, and Pharaoh finally said, fine, get out. Get out. And so then what happened next? Why is this Red Sea? Because he parted the Red Sea, exactly right. So they ran away from Egypt. They plundered it first. They grabbed all the extra clothes and lots of silver and gold, and then they took off towards the desert, and they ran as far as the Red Sea. And by this time, Pharaoh thought better of his decision to let them go, because there goes all of his labor pool. And he's like, oh, we got to go get them back. And so the armies of Pharaoh, or maybe they just were going to kill them because they were mad because their firstborn died. They chased them down, and God parted the Red Sea so that Israel could go through on dry land. But when Egypt tried to go in after them, the water came back down and drowned all of the armies of Egypt. And so Red Sea, and then Mount Sinai. That seems obvious why this is Mount Sinai, right? Because it's the shape of a mountain. And what happened on Mount Sinai? Law. Moses went up on Mount Sinai, and there God gave him the law, which is the 10 Commandments, what was written on the 2 tablets. But also another thing happened. The long name, the thing that gets missed all the time. He went up the mountain, but he went up the mountain not just to get the law, but also to really understand. Moses said, if I found favor, tell me your name, that I might know you, that I might continue to find favor, that I might continue. And so he didn't go up the mountain specifically for the law. He went up for the long name, because he asked for it. He asked, show me who you are, help me to know you. And so the long name, so that's the law. We do like this because it's kind of like the Bible is the book of law. So we do similar hand sign, and then the long name because it's really long. Yeah, Exodus 34:6. And Exodus 34:6 is Jesus. God with skin on. And so then we have the tabernacle. So Moses received instructions for the tabernacle, which was the place of worship. And why do we care about the tabernacle? The what? Yeah, it's where God lived with them. And it's a picture of the one that's in heaven that we will all get to worship at someday. So then next, Levites and priests. So when you were a kid, you were like, here's the church and here's the steeple. Open the door and see all the people. Here's all the people in there. There were Levites and priests. And then what did the Levites and priests do? Offering and feasts. Yeah. And so that offering and feasts, those were the things that the Levites were in charge of doing for the people to bring Israel together for worship. Offerings and feasts. Say it again. All the ceremonies. Yep. And that's what's in the book of Leviticus, all the ceremonies. Okay, so we have Exodus, we have Leviticus, Levites and priests, offering and feasts. Yeah, we won't talk about the golden calf incident. So in Numbers, numbering the faces. So why is this numbering the faces? Because we're pointing at all the noses. And so God commanded Israel to take a census. Moses, he commanded Moses to take a census of all the people by tribe. So they would, and they only counted the men, men who were like of fighting age. So young men. Yeah, so he counted them all down by tribe and clan and family. And so they're all put together. So they were numbering the faces. And where did they do that? At the Kadesh Oasis. Anybody know where the Kadesh Oasis is? Kadesh Barnea. And it is kind of south and a little bit, let me think about the map. It's southish, southwest. Is it west? Southwest of southeast. Southeast. It's on this side when you go down. It's not clear over to Egypt, but it's where that peninsula is. It's kind of in the south part of that peninsula. I thought about changing this and adding a bunch of these in because the map is helpful to me. So I was hoping it would be helpful to you as well. So it's kind of over here. The other side of what? It's over here? No, it's over here. Okay, there's a river there. Maybe it's over here. That's by that river. So they're at the Kadesh Oasis. And then what do? They do a palm tree because oasis, the universal sign for palm tree. Sorry, is that me? Come on. There we go. Kadesh Oasis. Oh, it's on the map. Cool. Then 12 spies. So we do, why is this 12 spies? Because we're spying, exactly right. Because we're looking around, we're going, what's going on in the land? And so the 12 spies go in. There's one from each tribe, so there are 12. And how many said, let's go? Only 2. So there were 10 people that were like, we can never do this. Never going to work. We should just go back to Egypt where we were in bondage for 400 years. We should just go back there because we're just all going to die here. But 2 were like, we can do it. And they were Caleb and Joshua. Exactly right. So because Israel groaned yet again, then what happened? They wandered around. So the trip from Egypt to the promised land was like on foot is like, I don't know, 40, 50 days that they could have made it. They could have made it very soon, but instead they wandered in the desert for 40 years. And the reason they wandered in the 40 years is because God said, this generation will not go in. He swore, they shall never enter my rest. Right. So he swore that they weren't going to go in. And so they wandered and died. And then their children grew up and became grown-up men and women. And so then what? Moab. As they're wandering, they end up in Moab. It is on the map. Yeah. So they wander, die, and then Moab, it's on the map, Moab, and then Moses, second law, dies. Why does Moses not get to go into the promised land? Yeah, because early on in their journey, Moses struck a rock in order to get water to come out. And then the next time around, when they were grumbling about not having water, God said, speak to the rock, but he didn't. He struck it again, thinking, just like we do, that this is the pattern. This is the way it works, that I do this and this and this, and then God does this. But God is not a God who wants us to trust in patterns. He wants us to trust in him. So Moses, he said, you're not going to be able to go into the promised land, but you can see it. So they were at Moab, and Moses gave them the second law. And then he died. And so that's through Deuteronomy. And then we have Joshua. And Joshua was the one who conquered the land. Joshua is a military leader. And so this is why we do this. He's a military leader. And so their first campaign was against Jericho. So since they were across the river in Moab, the first thing they have to do is cross the Jordan River. So we do this. That's why we do that, because they crossed the Jordan River. And then then the walls of Jericho come down. They march around the walls, and all the walls come down. And then they divide and conquer. So they go throughout the whole land, actually not through the whole land. Originally, God promised Abraham like clear to the Euphrates River, which is way over here. But they really only just took this little strip and a little bit on this side too. Oop. So divide, conquer, and then south to north, and then they divide and settle. And so they conquered the land, and then they settled it, and they broke it up into tribes. So into the 12 tribes, and then the era of the judges. The era of the judges hit. And so, yeah, that was them. Joshua. Okay, so through the book of Judges is a dark hit period in the nation of Israel. And so God sent judges, which were really more like military leaders as opposed to what we think of as a judge with a gavel making decisions. They were military leaders. And so the judges that we talk about are Deborah. And why is this Deborah? Because she was a girl, because God wanted to raise up a guy, but the guy was like, I don't think so. I'm not going in unless you go with me. And then, yeah, the whole thing didn't happen the way. And so the battle was won by a woman. Actually, not Deborah, though. It was Jael. I remember that because it's Devin's daughter's name. And then we have, or however you want to do it. And so why is this Samson? Why do we? Because he was strong. Yeah. Because he was out of his mind. He was like this big burly guy who was super strong. And so, Ty talked last week about this pattern of that was all the way through Judges, is that they would sin, they would fall into slavery, they would get tired of the slavery, they would cry out, and God would rush in and save them. And then they would fall back into sin, and that just happened again and again. And God brought in these judges to save them, because God is long suffering. He is patient, and he gives people the consequences of their sin. He lets them bear it. But as soon as they cry out, he was quick to also rush in and save them. So that's this Jael and Samson. And then where we ended is everyone did what was right in their own eyes, except for Ruth and Samuel. And so Ty talked about Ruth. He didn't talk much about Samuel. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Samuel. Samuel is the first prophet. He ushered in the age of the prophets. So the story that goes along with Samuel is that Samuel's dad was Elkanah and his mom was Hannah. And Elkanah had two wives, Peninnah, I think, and Hannah. And Peninnah had many children and Hannah had none. And children for a woman is the thing. It's still the thing, but then it was even more the thing. Having sons, someone to carry on your family heir. And it seems like Elkanah loved Hannah more than Peninnah, because when he gave to Peninnah and her children, but he gave a double portion to Hannah, because it seems like that's a sign of favoritism, because he was sad for her because she couldn't have children. And so Hannah goes to the temple in Shiloh and cries out to God. She is on her face in tears, crying out. And Eli, the priest, thinks she's drunk because she's just like, what is this crazy woman drunk already at 10 a.m.? And she's like, no, I'm not drunk. I am in distress because I want so badly to have a son. And Eli says to her, okay, may God have favor on you. May God give you that. Eli is not a good priest. He's not a good priest at all. And yet God gave, let him pronounce Samuel to come in. And Hannah said, oh God, if you will give me a son, I will dedicate him to you. I will give him to you. He will serve you. And so when she finally did have a son and named him Samuel, when he was still a little boy, she took him back to the temple and gave him to Eli and to raise. And so when Samuel was still a little boy, God spoke to him and said, Samuel, and he thought it was Eli calling him. So he ran to Eli's side and said, yeah, I'm here. What can I do for you? And Eli was like, I didn't call you. And so he went back to bed, and and God called again. And he ran again to Eli's side and said, what can I do for you? What do you need? Because he was a servant. And again, Samuel said, or Eli said, wasn't me. Eventually, Eli says, I think I know what's going on here. God is talking to you. So the next time that you hear your name being called, find out what God wants and come back and tell me. And so Samuel did that. He heard from God. God gave him the message that Eli's house was going to be destroyed because Eli's sons were wicked, and Eli didn't do anything about it. Eli knew that his sons were wicked, that they were on the take, that they were, just evil people. And even though Eli didn't do those things, he didn't do anything to rein in his sons and control them. So he said, your house will be destroyed. And so then that ushered in the age of the prophets. Samuel heard from the Lord. He received messages from the Lord and prophesied over the nation of Israel, and was a key player for the nation up until the time of the kings, and actually through the time of the kings. So the ones that we're going to add today they just add a little bit to the timeline. So now we're at 1000. We started at 2015. Now they're at 1000 BC, and we have a united kingdom. So all of the Israelite tribes are all living in the land, and they're all together under one kingdom. So they have a united kingdom. And so that is the place where Lars will pick up next week. So we're going to go through it one more time together. So one more time, stand up, and we won't do the Bible part. We'll start with creation. So ready? Everybody get your stretch on. Ready? Oh, I'll do it over here. Sorry, I forget about that. Okay. Creation, fall, flood, confusion, 2000 BC, ancient Near East, Persian Gulf, salt, Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah, Tigris, Euphrates, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, Mediterranean, Israel, Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, Jacob, Israel, Joseph, Egypt, Israel, Egypt, 400 years bondage, 1500 BC, Moses meets Yahweh, let my people go. No. Plagues, Passover, Red Sea, Mount Sinai, law, long name, tabernacle, Levites and priests, offerings and feasts, numbering the faces, the Kadesh oasis, 12 spies, wonders, dies. Moab, Moses, second law, dies. Joshua, Jordan, Jericho, divide, conquer. South, north, divide, settle. 12 tribes, judges. Deborah, Samson, everyone did what was right in their own eyes except for Ruth and Samuel. Good job. Okay. That's it for me. Okay, everybody take 5. And yeah, and Tad will be on next to talk to you about Derek Keene.